Hi, welcome to another edition of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, the show that documents the unfolding world communist revolution and pushes back. Please like the show, share the show, subscribe to epochtv. You will see information you've never seen anywhere else. Please also visit my website, trevorloudon.com. My books, Security Risk Senators, Parts 1 and Part 2, White House Reds, which will give you the communist background of Joe Biden, Enemies Within, and especially Enemies Within the Church. So today I'm going to talk about a man called Anatoly Golitsyn. Now, we all read books, we all meet people that shape our philosophy. And I would say that Golitsyn, when it comes to geopolitics, shaped my philosophy, shaped my understanding more than anyone else I've ever come across or read. So who is this gentleman, Anatoly Golitsyn? Unfortunately, he died in 2008, age 82. He's no longer with us. But I think his contribution to history will be, in the future, remembered and honored. Now, Anatoly Golitsyn was a KGB officer. December 1961, he defected with his wife and child out of Helsinki, Finland, to the CIA. He was brought to the United States, and he met James Jesus Angleton, the legendary head of CIA counterintelligence. So what did he have to say? What he had to say shocked the intelligence community to the core. Most of the people he talked to were in denial at the time. Most of the people in the intelligence communities are still in denial. What he had to say makes what's happening in the world today much, much clearer. People read Golitsyn, they'll understand a little bit why I think how I do, why I analyze things the way I do. This is what he said. The Soviet Union held a world gathering of communist parties in 1957, 81 parties, and they started to talk then about a new way of bringing world communism, a new way of defeating the West. They weren't really clued in on what the plans was, but they were prepared for some big changes. Things were going to be different. Now, these changes were apparently worked out by a man called Shelepin, one of the top theorists for the KGB, very, very important Soviet at the time. And this is how it played out. They set up an internal KGB, a KGB with inside the KGB. And this was to direct a plan moving forward. It might take decades to complete it, that would completely alter the world balance of power in favor of communism by a whole series of big strategic deceptions. The Soviets knew they could never defeat the West one-on-one. They would have to deceive the West, use the West's weaknesses against it. And this is what Shelepin proposed. Now, the reason Golitsyn knew about this, because he was part of this inner circle KGB. And normally, the people in the inner circle did not talk to the people in the outer circles. They weren't allowed to travel overseas, so that any defectors from the KGB would only have what the people in the outer circle knew, or what they'd been allowed to know. So you had a lot of genuine defectors who would defect to, Germany and France and Britain, but they only knew things to a certain level. They didn't really know the depth of the strategic disinformation. And Golitsyn was very unique, and by a unique set of circumstances, he got the opportunity to escape out of Finland to the United States. And the KGB were distraught. They sent people all over the world, 54 delegations all over the world to various places to get people ready to counter what Golitsyn would say. They ordered a stopping of all contacts with very important contacts, Western contacts, because they knew that Golitsyn could spill the beans, that he knew so much. Golitsyn provided the information that confirmed that Kim Philby, the former head of MI6, the British Overseas Intelligence Service, was a KGB spy. He identified Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of Britain, as a probable KGB agent, the Prime Minister of Finland. So high-ranking KGB agents all through the West. So we shouldn't be surprised when I make claims like you have 100 members of the US Congress who couldn't pass a background check. and 40 senators who couldn't pass a background check. The Soviets and now the Chinese have been experts at co-opting high-level politicians for decades. That's what they do. That's how they achieve what they achieve. But this was the real story that Golitsyn told. He identified a lot of spies. He did a huge amount of damage to the Soviet cause and helped the Western intelligence services a lot. But what he said split the Western intelligence services because some people just couldn't believe it, weren't willing to believe it. So this is what Golitsyn said. We are going to see a series of splits in the communist world. Because at the time, the communist world was a very unified bloc, basically controlled by the Soviet Union. Nobody disobeyed the Soviet Union. But we're going to see some splits, major splits. We're going to see some countries split away from the communist bloc. These will be strategic deceptions designed to lure the West into funding these countries, sort of prize them out of the Soviet orbit. We will see this happen for several years. We will see a situation develop in Europe where we see a major retreat from communism, where we may see the Eastern Bloc collapse, a de-emphasization of the word communism, maybe a repudiation of communism by the Soviet Union. This would lull the West. The West would think communism is over. We can make peace with Russia. We can do business with Russia. We can do business with the former Soviet countries. We can start to disarm. We don't have to keep our armaments up because the Soviet Union is no more. And that's exactly what Bill Clinton did. The peace dividend slashed Reagan's military to ribbons. And every Democratic president since has done the same thing. Well, then Golitsyn said, when the Eastern Bloc is dissolved, that will leave a whole bunch of spies in the Eastern Bloc. They will be able to infiltrate into NATO. They'll probably move into East Germany and go underground and eventually take over West Germany. There would be a time when the West was so lulled and so unprepared that slowly Russia could rebuild its military might, pretending to be a capitalist country, part of the West, but it would be allowed to rebuild its military might. China would stay more openly communist, though it would change its forms. It would adopt business and work on making money and building up its wealth. And when the West was weakened to the degree necessary, Russia and China would combine and smite the United States with one closed fist, destroy the United States, and establish a worldwide Leninist dictatorship, which is exactly where we're about to go now, in my opinion. Golitsyn made something like 180 predictions. About 140 of them have come true. But this really upset a lot of people in the intelligence services because, they thought they understood the Soviets, but they were being deceived. Just after Golitsyn defected, China and the Soviet Union had a split. They actually, later on, they had hostilities. They fired cannons at each other across the rivers in Siberia. This is exactly what Golitsyn had predicted. He based this on the fact that in the 1950s, Yugoslavia under Tito had genuinely broken with Stalin. Tito was scared of being assassinated by Stalin. They broke. And the West came in and offered Yugoslavia all sorts of money. Come with us, abandon the Soviet bloc, become part of the West. We will fund you. We will give you anything you want. And the Soviets realized that if we can do fake splits, the West will come in and fund these countries. They'll pretend to be wanting to get out of the communist bloc. They'll get lots of Western money, and the West will basically fund its own destruction. So there was a big Sino-Soviet split in the early 60s. And in the West, there were pro-Russian communist parties and pro-Chinese communist parties. The communist parties split in every Western country. So you had that. Then Romania split from the communist bloc. It became more independent, started to follow a more independent course, and actually got most favored trading nation status out of America for that. Let's try and lure Ceausescu right out of the Soviet bloc. He's being a bit of a rebel. He's being independent. So the Romanians got lots of American money. And you also had the Czechoslovakian spring of 1968, when there was a liberalization in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. They wanted a communism with human face. But that was suppressed by Soviet tanks. But it was regarded as a sign of liberalization in the Eastern Bloc. And it wasn't such a great surprise then when in 1989, 1990, the Germans tore down the Berlin Wall. The Romanians overthrew Ceausescu, and the Soviet Union basically gave up Eastern Europe, and the West rejoiced. So the war was still going on in the CIA. James Jesus Angleton, as a follower of Galitzyn's theories, was warning everybody, don't fall for this. There is no real Soviet-Chinese split. This is a scam. Don't buy into it. Ceausescu is still working for the KGB. Don't give him lots of money. And he was saying all of this kind of stuff, but the main faction of the CIA wanted to believe this stuff. People want to believe that things are better than they are. So Angleton became very unpopular. And Angleton was eventually purged in the 70s after the Church hearings. The very left-wing Senator Frank Church from Idaho held hearings. Angleton was basically hung out to dry. He had been ordered to monitor certain communications and then was criticized for doing so. And he was fired by Colby, the director of CIA. Angleton believed to his dying day that Colby was a KGB agent. I've read Colby's biography independently before I knew that Angleton had that opinion. And I read his biography, I thought, this guy's a KGB officer. This guy is working for the KGB. It seemed so obvious to me reading it. And apparently Angleton thought exactly the same. So Angleton was purged. So the champions of Galitzyn were really lost their way in the intelligence services, and most of the intelligence services, the CIA, etc., regarded Galitzyn as a crazy guy, that he couldn't be believed, and it was just he was a scam artist and this kind of thing. So they really ignored all the warnings. They really believed the China-Russia split was real. They believed that Ceausescu's rebellion against the Russians were real. They believed in Dubček. They believed in the collapse of the Berlin Wall. They thought it was all genuine. Now, fortuitously, while this was going on in New Zealand, I had the pleasure for some years of being associated with a New Zealander who had infiltrated our Communist Party, the Socialist Unity Party. He was working for our security services. In 1983, he went to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. Now remember, Mr. Gorbachev, who opened up the Soviet Union, gave us perestroika, all this kind of thing. Mr. Gorbachev didn't come on the scene till 85. In 83, they were being told, the students at this school, 3,500 at any one time, there's going to be a massive liberalization in the Eastern Bloc. We're going to give up the word communism. The communism does much better in times of détente. We're going to have the greatest détente you've ever seen. We're going to have a new, liberal, cool, hip leader, and he's going to make friends with the West. We're going to give up much of Eastern Europe. We're going to give up the word communism in Russia. And the West are going to love us. And they're going to give us so much money. They're going to disarm. And when the time is right, we are going to strike. So they were echoing exactly the same message that had been taught, that had been revealed in 1961 by Galitzyn. They also said things like Afghanistan was raging at the time, the war in Afghanistan. A lot of the communists from all over the world were very disconcerted by the fact that the Red Army wasn't winning this. They were being bogged down by these tribesmen, and they would moan and complain to the Soviet instructors, what is happening in Afghanistan? We are embarrassed. The communist movement is embarrassed. The mighty Red Army is being bogged down by tribesmen. This is horrible for Soviet prestige. The Soviet instructors would say, look, don't worry about this. Don't worry about this. This is our plan. America had its Vietnam. America got a bloody nose. They were beaten by people in pajamas. They were made to look like fools on the world stage. We want to make the Americans not fear us. We need to have our Vietnam. We're going to fight for 8 or 9 years in Afghanistan. We are going to be driven out with our tail between our legs. We're going to be embarrassed on the world stage, and the Americans will no longer fear us, and they will disarm. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. The Americans in the 90s, they disarmed because why worry about the Russians? They couldn't even beat the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. They couldn't even beat tribesmen in Afghanistan. Why worry about the Russians? And just going back a little bit too, with the prospect of a new leader coming forward who would dismantle the Soviet bloc, this was actually supposed to happen earlier. Andropov, the head of the KGB, when he became the leader of the Soviet Union, he was portrayed in the Western media as this hip, cool, jazz-loving, Scotch-drinking, new kind of Soviet leader. He was supposed to do the liberalization, but he got kidney disease and he died, and they had to put Chernenko, the old Stalinist, in for a couple of years until they could train Mr. Gorbachev for the role he was to play. Golitsyn made the point, Russian leaders are chosen. You know, we have the idea in the West, you elect a president, he has one set of policies, he does them. Another president has different policies, he does them. Golitsyn made the point, in the Soviet Union, since Stalin's time, the KGB, the inner circle, the CP, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, decide on a policy, and they choose the leader to fulfill that policy. Gorbachev was chosen to fill that policy, just as Yeltsin was, just as Putin is today. This is not Putin's war in the Ukraine, this is the KGB's war. So this is what I think. It didn't go completely to plan for the Soviets. There was always hiccups in a long-range plan like this. Poland genuinely broke away. They purged communists over a long battle. They purged communists from their intelligence services, and Poland became really independent. Ukraine took longer. They didn't really shake off the Russian influence properly till the Maidan of 2014, which is why Putin has hated them ever since. So constituted Russian Empire, the new Soviet Union needed to take Ukraine back, because you can't conquer Europe without Ukraine. That is why I'm so fired up about Ukraine right now, because this is part of the plan. We are at the stage now that one closed fist is coming into play. The Chinese are getting ready to strike into the Pacific, and I believe America. The Russians are getting ready to conquer Europe, and it won't be with conventional forces, it'll be with nuclear weapons. Iran, which is a surrogate of Russia and China, is getting ready to go. So is North Korea, which is a puppet of Russia as well. So we're at the stage where America is weak and they are ready to go and take America out in the big final burst and establish the global communism. And what has stood in their way? A series of miracles. The miracles that have happened in Ukraine are amazing, and the toughness and resilience of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership. That is the only reason we are not in World War III now, in my opinion. Putin's invasion of Ukraine was the first step, I believe, in the one closed fist strategy. The goal was to go into Ukraine, collapse Ukraine, take it in a week, then you're on the borders of NATO, and at that point he would say, well, we demand the immediate disbandment of NATO, or there will be a nuclear attack. And NATO would either disband and Europe would be conquered, or the Soviets, the Russians, would take them out in a nuclear attack. And it would be all on. The Chinese would attack into the Pacific, attack the United States, attack Hawaii, attack the West Coast. Russia would attack Alaska and come down through Canada into the United States. There would be EMP attacks, there would be electromagnetic pulse attacks, there would be chemical attacks, there would also be major attacks across the southern border. We know the Chinese and the Russians have lots of personnel in Latin America right now waiting for the order. And what has stopped this? The fact that the Ukrainians did not fold in 3 days as Putin expected and are holding on, and China doesn't want to go alone, and Russia can't move because it's bogged down in Ukraine, so we're now at a stalemate. The big final push predicted by Golitsyn is at a stalemate because the Ukrainians have stood so strongly, and thank God many nations in NATO who understand this Golitsyn strategy. Many of the Polish leaders have read Golitsyn. Many of the Moldovan leaders and other countries have read Golitsyn. They understand what's at stake here. Unfortunately, most American policymakers haven't. They just see this as a series of regional struggles. They don't see this as part of a widespread, a long-range strategic program to bring this country to its knees. Well, even worse than that. So I urge you, of course you will not take this at my word. Go online, order copies of New Lies for Old by Natalie Golitsyn. Get The Perestroika Deception by Natalie Golitsyn. Remember when you read New Lies for Old, this was published in 1984, before Gorbachev was even heard of. He predicts the fall of the Berlin Wall. He predicts the collapse of communism. Who else was predicting the collapse of communism in 1984? He predicted what we would see today, the general disarmament of the West, the weakening of NATO. He predicted the rise of China as a great power. And he predicted that Russia and China would join together and smash the United States. That should send chills down all of our spines. But read Golitsyn. It's not an easy read. There's a little bit technical. He's a KGB officer. He's very methodical, but he is so accurate and so logical and just so unstinting in his search for the truth, to tell his mission. As he said, he came to the losing side to tell the truth. He knew that America was losing this major battle because they didn't even know it was going on. So please read Golitsyn. Get your policymakers, if you know congressmen or senators, get them to read Golitsyn. They will look at the world in a very different way, and they'll certainly look at the war in Ukraine in a very, very different way. And we need conservatives to be standing up, patriots to be standing up for Ukraine, because it's only Ukraine that's stopping World War III right now. They tell us if we challenge Russia, we guarantee we're going to have World War III. Maybe, but if we don't stop the Russians in Ukraine, we are guaranteed World War III, and we will almost certainly lose it. So I hope you found this interesting and challenging. Please don't take my word for it. Read for yourself. Study what this man has to say. I'll be very interested in your reactions. So thanks for tuning in to Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. Thanks for supporting epochtv. Thanks for supporting my website. Hope you'll be back for the next episode. We're going to keep you appraised. So God bless America. God bless everyone who loves freedom. And just keep on working for liberty. Thank you so much.